I was on a work trip and running late because storms had delayed my flight for hours. By the time I landed, I was already behind schedule, but I still had to drive several hours west to meet a client the following morning. The rain hadn't stopped since my plane touched down. The wind was fierce, pushing the small rental car across the lanes of the interstate, and every few minutes the headlights caught waves of spray rising from the tires of trucks ahead of me. It was close to 11:30 at night when I finally decided I needed to stop. I pulled off near a gas station and a small diner, and right next to them was a roadside motel with exterior-facing doors. The neon vacancy sign buzzed and flickered. Half the letters dimmed out, but I was too exhausted to care. I told myself it would be fine for one night. Inside the room, I followed my routine almost automatically. I locked the door, slid the metal latch across, and double-checked the window to make sure it was latched tight. I set my phone to charge on the nightstand, draped my soaked jacket over the heater, and switched off the lamp. The smell of damp carpet filled the air, heavy and stale, but I ignored it. The weather app still carried a storm warning until at least 2 a.m. I lay down on the bed and listened to the rain hammering against the door and rattling on the balcony railings like handfuls of gravel. My eyelids were already drifting shut when 3 hard knocks jolted me awake. A man's voice came from the other side of the door, calm, even. "Sir, I need help." My car slid off the road. I pushed myself up and went to the peephole. All I could see was the edge of a baseball cap and the top of a dark jacket. He was standing close, too close, so that his face stayed hidden. He hadn't knocked on any other door. He stayed at mine. "I'll call for help," I said through the wood. "I need to use your phone," he replied, the same calm tone. "My battery died. Just open for a second." "I'll call," I repeated, my voice sharper. There was a pause. Then he asked, "What is your name?" His tone was casual, but something in the way he waited for an answer chilled me. "John," he finally said, still standing by the entrance. I picked up the room phone and dialed the front desk. It rang and rang. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. My heart was thudding harder now, and my hands felt clammy on the receiver. I dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, I gave her the name of the motel, the address on the key card, and explained that a man was outside asking me to open the door. She told me firmly, "Stay inside. A deputy will swing by as soon as possible." While I was still on the line, the man knocked again, softer this time. "Sir," he said, "I'm not leaving." The dispatcher asked me to describe him. I whispered, "Jacket, cap, average height. He's standing too close." She asked if I heard anyone else nearby. At first I said no. Then, straining to listen, I caught it, a faint whisper off to the side. My stomach dropped. I inched the curtain back just enough to peek. Under the balcony overhang, 2 shapes stood in the rain. One was right outside my door. The other lingered at the corner where the walkway turned. That second one held a phone, angled toward my room, as if trying to catch movement inside. When my curtain shifted, he lowered the phone quickly. I shoved the dresser toward the door, wedged the luggage rack under the handle, and slid my suitcase against the connecting door. My hands shook so badly the keys rattled on the table. The man's voice changed slightly, still calm but lower. "Sir, I'm with the front desk. We have a leak and need to check your bathroom." Just minutes earlier, he had claimed to be stranded. Now it was a different story. I didn't reply. Metal scraped against the latch as if he was testing it. The chain pulled taut and hummed under pressure. Then silence, followed by a slow exhale through the crack. For several seconds, the only sounds were the rain and the rumble of thunder. Then I heard quick footsteps retreating along the walkway. I peeked through the curtain again just in time to see the 2 figures jogging toward the far stairwell. A door slammed, an engine roared to life, and tires hissed against the waterlogged pavement. No headlights, just the sound of them leaving. A few minutes later, red and blue lights washed over the thin curtains. A deputy called out, identifying himself. I asked to see his badge through the peephole before opening even a crack. This time, I saw a real face, a uniform, and the night clerk standing behind him. Together, they inspected the walkway. Thin scratches marred the paint around my door latch. Muddy footprints led from the far stairs straight to my door, then back toward the rear lot. The deputy checked the roadside ditch. There was no wrecked car, no skid marks, no sign of anyone stranded. The clerk mentioned that earlier, a woman at the gas station had reported men trying car doors under the canopy, but she had driven off before he could call it in. The deputy nodded and said there had been similar attempts at small motels during storms, opportunists using bad weather to their advantage. The clerk tried pulling up the security feed on his tablet, but the cameras only buffered. He muttered that rain had shorted out the wiring before. The deputy shrugged, said it wasn't unusual during downpours, then asked for my rental car information and room number. He took my statement, reminded me to keep the chain locked, and told me not to open the door for anyone. When they left, I sat on the bed with the lights on, watching the stairwell through the peephole until dawn. Every passing car made me flinch. I didn't sleep again that night. At sunrise, the storm finally moved east. The lot steamed under the weak light, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and oil. When I checked out, I noticed thin arcs scratched into the paint around the latch. I snapped a photo and texted it to the deputy, who replied with a case number. I drove to a coffee shop, sat with my back against the wall, and kept my bag at my feet. I went to my meeting, but I couldn't stop scanning the windows. That evening, when it was time to head home, I booked a hotel with interior hallways instead of exterior doors. To this day, I still wedge the door, set the latch, and hang the "Do Not Disturb" sign. If someone knocks late, I don't answer. I call the front desk. If it's an emergency, they can call the police. What stuck with me most wasn't the footsteps or even the scratches on the latch. It was the voice. Calm, practiced, steady. He said he wasn't leaving, like patience itself was his weapon. That tone nearly fooled me. The storm had made his story believable. The calmness made it feel safe, but it wasn't. Now, whenever I pass a roadside motel with outside entries, I remember that night. I think of how close I came to sliding the chain off just to be polite. I keep one simple rule: never open the door for anyone you didn't call yourself. Call for them instead. If they're real, they'll wait. If not, they'll leave. It was a wet, miserable Tuesday night in Boston, the kind of night when the whole city seemed weighed down under a sheet of gray water. I had stayed late at work near Copley Square, longer than I meant to, and by the time I left the office, the streets were already slick with heavy rain. I pulled my hood tight, swung onto my bike, and began pedaling toward home. The sky was dark, the lamps along the sidewalks hazy behind curtains of falling water, and my headlight made little more than a thin white spear in the storm. Each turn of the pedals splashed water up onto my pants, soaking me through, and I tucked my wallet and phone deeper into my jacket to keep them dry. I cut over toward Beacon Street, where the traffic was thin and the glow of taillights stretched like smeared paint across the wet pavement. At Arlington Street, I glanced out toward the Charles River. The esplanade below was nearly empty, its trees bending against the gusts, benches gleaming with rain. Cars hissed past, sending a constant spray across the curb. I thought of the stone tunnels under Storrow Drive, small pedestrian underpasses curved like old arches, lined with faded graffiti. They connected Beacon to the river path. I had used them many times. If I cut through one, I could ride along the river, then cross the Massachusetts Avenue Bridge into Cambridge. It would spare me some of the worst puddles and, more importantly, keep me away from traffic. The rain was getting worse, hammering my helmet and dripping cold against the back of my neck. When I reached Fairfield Street, I spotted the footbridge and below it, the dark mouth of the tunnel. The lamps along the railing flickered like they were losing power. There were no park rangers, no pedestrians, just the slick stone arch yawning in the storm. I told myself it would take only seconds. I shifted down, dropped off the curb, and coasted into the underpass. My light swung across the wet stone. The tunnel was narrow, walls sweating from the rain above, a seam in the ceiling dripping water in a slow, steady beat. My tires hissed against the concrete, echoing so loudly that the short tunnel felt stretched out, as though it went on forever. At the far side, I could see a slice of the river, silver under the storm. I was halfway through when I sat up, squeezing the brakes. A figure was standing at the exit. At first, I thought it might be a jogger, someone waiting for the downpour to ease. But the longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. They didn't move. They weren't scrolling a phone, weren't looking at the water. They were turned toward me, still, square, and silent. Feet apart, hands low, a hood pulled forward to shadow their face. "Hey," I called, trying to sound casual. My voice bounced flatly back at me in the tunnel. No reply. The figure took one slow step forward. That was all, but it was enough to put them directly in the center of the exit, blocking the narrow path. My headlight picked up a faint shine on their jacket. Their face stayed hidden, rain sheeted behind them, making the opening look like a curtain of water I wasn't meant to pass through. My pulse ticked up. I glanced back toward Beacon. That's when I noticed movement. Another figure had slipped in behind me near the mouth of the tunnel I had entered. He hugged the wall, head down, shoulders hunched. He didn't speak either. He just started walking toward me with a steady, deliberate pace. The underpass suddenly felt claustrophobic. The stone walls closed in like jaws. I did the math. If I turned back, I'd ride right into the second man. If I pressed forward, I'd have to confront the one at the exit. In these tunnels, one person standing wide could block you completely. You either hit them or scraped yourself against the wall. My phone was zipped inside my jacket. To reach it, I would have to take one hand off the bars, risk sliding out on the wet ground. Not an option. I rang my tiny handlebar bell instead. 3 sharp dings. It sounded pitiful in the echoing stone. "I'm just passing through," I said, forcing my voice to stay level. The man behind me kept coming. I could hear the slap of his shoes, closer with every step. The one ahead didn't budge. He stood planted in the exit like a door made of flesh and fabric. For one reckless second, I considered stopping, trying to reason with them. Then the reality hit. One in front, one behind, no one else around, storm masking everything. Whatever this was, it wasn't good. My body made the decision before my brain did. I stood on the pedals, pushed forward, as if I was ready to ride straight through. My headlight jittered across stone. My eyes locked on the figure blocking the way. I aimed my wheel slightly left toward the curve of the wall. My plan wasn't clever. It was survival. Force them to move, then slip through whatever gap opened. 10 feet, 5. At the last second, the figure lifted a hand out of the jacket. Pale fingers glinted in the light. That was their move, their commitment. I made mine. I squeezed the brakes hard, loading the tires, then released and yanked the bars right toward the center. The back wheel skidded, throwing up a fan of water. The figure flinched, shoulders twisting instinctively, and in that fraction of hesitation, I surged past. My shoulder grazed the wall. My handlebar clipped their forearm with a hollow thud, my bell ringing wildly. A short, angry sound burst from them. Not words, just noise. My pedal scraped stone, jolting my knee. The bike wobbled, nearly went out from under me, but somehow I kept it steady. Then I was through, bursting out into the rain of the esplanade. I didn't look back right away. I just pedaled hard, water spraying into my face, my legs burning as I shot down the empty path. My chain clattered, tires slicing sheets of water. By the time I reached the open space near the Hatch Memorial Shell, I dared a glance. They were still at the tunnel's mouth. 2 figures, side by side, small in the gray distance, not chasing, not moving. One of them lifted an arm, not waving exactly, just raising it slow and unsettling. My stomach lurched. I pulled into the nearest lit stretch, finally dug my phone out with trembling hands and dialed 911. The dispatcher's calm voice grounded me. I spat out the details. Esplanade, Fairfield Street Tunnel, 2 people blocking, acting aggressive. I had to push through. She asked if I was safe. I told her I was moving toward the Mass Ave bridge, toward more lights, and I'd wait there. I stopped under a brighter lamp near Dartmouth Street footbridge, chest heaving, rain still pouring. The Charles River beside me was black and choppy, reflecting streaks of city light. A couple in ponchos hurried past without so much as a glance. Sirens sounded somewhere, but in Boston they echo from all directions. For a tense minute, I couldn't tell if any were for me. Finally, a state police cruiser rolled along Starrow Drive overhead, lights flickering across the wet road. The dispatcher called back, asking me to meet officers at Beacon and Dartmouth near the footbridge stairs. I walked my bike up, still shaking, and met 2 troopers, followed soon by a Boston police car. I told them everything, how the figure at the exit had stood still, how the second man appeared behind me, how both boxed me in without a word. They asked if I had seen weapons. I said no, but the setup alone was enough. One trooper went into the tunnel with a flashlight. Another swept Storrow with a spotlight. Both returned, shaking their heads. No one remained. Rain had washed away any chance of footprints. They took my statement, wrote down my information, and warned me to avoid the underpasses at night, especially in storms. Stick to the main crossings, they said. I nodded, heart still hammering, promising myself I'd never cut through those tunnels again. This time I meant it. It was a wet, cold October night in 2017, a little past 9:30 p.m., when my old 2008 Honda City sputtered once, coughed twice, and then died outright on Route 17C, just west of Owego, right at the start of that infamous stretch everyone in Tioga County calls Devil's Elbow. The storm had been hammering the southern tier all evening. Rain wasn't simply falling, it was tumbling down in hard, silvery sheets, the kind that turned your windshield wipers into useless metronomes, smearing more than clearing. I'd been heading back from a friend's place in Binghamton, thinking I'd save time by avoiding the interstate construction on I-86. That detour, harmless on a dry evening, had already begun to feel like a bad idea. I knew enough local lore to know Devil's Elbow had a reputation, but in the moment, it was just a treacherous, black-watered curve with a stalled car and no other headlights for miles. That S-curve of 17C west of Owego is older than the interstate and far stranger. It snakes along the river, hemmed in by damp, sagging timber and an embankment that drops off so steeply you don't see the far end until you're already committed. Ask anyone in the area and they'll tell you the bend feels alive, like it watches you glide through. It's been tied to ghost stories for decades, maybe longer. One of the oldest, and most repeated, is the Lady in White. A pale, silent figure said to appear only during heavy storms or thick mountain fog. In some versions, she's a young bride killed on her wedding night in the 1920s when her Model T skidded off the embankment. In others, she's a nameless hitchhiker from the 1950s, struck and left for dead. The details shift, but everyone agrees on the essentials. She's always dressed in white, usually a long gown that clings wetly to her frame, and she lingers near the tree line, approaching stalled cars or worse, standing perfectly still and watching from the shadows. The stories have their own grim variations. In one, she knocks softly on windows. In another, she hums or whispers, asking for a ride before vanishing. Locals swear you should never meet her eyes. People who did, they say, suffered misfortune, accidents, sudden illness, even disappearances no one could explain. Truckers avoid stopping near Devil's Elbow at night. Homeowners up on the ridges claim they've glimpsed her from their porches as storms roll through. Whether she's a ghost, a warning, or just a story designed to keep people cautious on a dangerous road, the legend endures, and it was running through my head as my car gave up without a sound. No clunk, no shudder, no flicker of dashboard lights, just a dead engine and the roar of rain on the roof. I twisted the key again. Nothing. I checked my phone. One flickering bar, but enough to call for a tow. The dispatcher, a guy named Mike, sounded rushed. Flooding everywhere, trucks backed up. Could be an hour, he said. Maybe more. Stay safe. I locked the doors, switched on the hazards, and sat back, breathing shallowly. Outside, the curve dipped and twisted along the river like a coiled animal. The woods on the right pressed in dark and heavy. Beyond my headlights, the road simply vanished. 10 minutes crawled by before I glanced through the passenger window and froze. Something stood beneath the tree line about 50 feet away. Through the blur of rain, I could make out only a figure in pale clothing, head bowed, hair or a hood hanging forward, perfectly still. I told myself it was a jogger or maybe a neighbor's kid caught in the storm, though this was the middle of nowhere and no houses dotted that side of the road. If it was a person, why weren't they waving me down? Why stand half hidden instead of asking for help? I wiped the fog from the glass for a better look, but the rain distorted everything. The figure didn't move. A few minutes later, when I dared to look again, she was closer, 30 feet now, standing by a thinner tree. I hadn't seen her walk. Her outline was sharper. Long, dripping fabric clung to her body, hair plastered across her face. My stomach tightened. I thumbed on my phone's flashlight and aimed it toward her, but the beam fizzled in the downpour. "Hey," I called through a cracked window, voice swallowed by rain. "You okay?" No answer. Only the hiss of water on asphalt. Mike rang back. The tow truck was delayed. Route 434 had flooded. "Might be another hour," he warned. I told him about the woman. "Probably just a local," I said, but my voice shook. He paused. "Stay in your car," he said firmly. "Don't get out." When I checked again, she was closer. Always closer. 15 feet. 10. The pale fabric now looked like an old-fashioned dress, the kind you see in sepia wedding photos. Where her face should have been was just darkness, a wet black blur. "What do you want?" My voice cracked. She didn't answer, didn't flinch. My fingers locked around the steering wheel so tightly my hands